For more on this, we're going to bring in former Deputy National Security Advisor and author of the book, The Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, KT McFarland. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to build on some of those themes here. Obviously, again, you working closely with the president, trying to make sure we're keeping this nation secure for the people that call America home. What are you seeing here in this threat, and what concerns you the most?
I guess it's three things. Number one, we may have the smartest, most innovative tech geniuses on the planet in the United States, but they're not working for the U.S. government because we're just not very good at protecting ourselves. And, every time one of these happens, Joe, we say, oh, that's the wake-up call. We're really going to get serious about defending our networks now, but we don't. The Chinese, they hacked into the Obama administration's Office of Management Personnel. North Korea hacked into Sony's TV studios. Now the Russians, we think it's the Russians, they've hacked into most of the government emails. So the attacks are getting bigger and bigger. They're getting more expansive, and we're not quite sure what they're doing with all the information that they're hoovering up. But the bottom line is we can't seem to protect ourselves. So we need to get somebody in here to help. We need to get the good guys, and the good guys should be in Silicon Valley. But in previous administrations, including the Trump administration, even the Obama administration, Silicon Valley, they blew everybody off. They said, we don't want to work for government. We're, independent. We're libertarian. We don't believe in this. So I think that the first thing we have to do is say, okay, U.S. government, we're not very good at doing this. Number two, we need help. Where do we need help from? We need it from Silicon Valley, and you guys have to help us, and you really should help us, because if you look at what's just happened with Operation Warp Speed, we showed that a public-private partnership, a government partnering with the labs, the pharmaceutical companies, the distribution companies, we had a miracle. In 9 months, we got a vaccine. So we can have these public-private partnerships. And then the other thing that really concerns me as a national security expert, where are the red lines? This is all gray. We've had the president says, gee, it might not be Russia, maybe it's China. It's Secretary of State said, no, we think it's China. Attorney General says, yeah, we think it's Russia. We're not even sure what the return address is on these weapons, on these cyber weapons. And then what does constitute an act of war? Some U.S. senators say, well, this is an act of war by Russia. Well, okay, but do you really want to go to World War III over stolen emails? I'm not sure. But all of that being said, we need to figure out some red lines, and we need to publish them and say, you do this, you steal our emails, that's one thing, we'll come back at you. But you start closing down our electric grid, you start fiddling around with our nuclear weapons secrets, man, that is an act of war.
Well, I think also to that point, you start talking about what does an act of aggression truly constitute in the 21st century world. We talked about a little bit in the intro. We used to talk about, a two-war doctrine where, again, an ability to really defend your country. Ronald Reagan talking about peace through strength. JFK talking about the fact that our armaments must be equal to our commitments around the world. In this type of technologically driven world, what is our commitment to the American people? What is the proportional response for something of this nature to ensure that people actually are feeling secure in their own homes, and making sure that, as it was said before, that we don't have the virtual equivalent of foreign planes flying over U.S. soil?
Joe, you've just brought up a really important point, which is what is our protection for our civil society? An attack on the U.S. electric grid or the U.S. financial systems by some cyber actor, some enemy, is probably even more lethal than an attack on, let's say, the United States military at some base overseas. We need to understand that so far we have a cyber command, and the cyber command out of the Pentagon says, here are our priorities. We're going to protect the Pentagon. We're going to protect U.S. government. We're going to protect U.S. defense industries. We haven't done that very well, by the way. But guess who we're not protecting? We're not protecting civil society. We're not going to protect the financial system. We're not going to protect, the water supply filtration systems. So we have this sort of disconnect where the best and smartest people are working for the government in Russia and China, the best hackers in the world. And we don't have the best hackers on our team. And we need to understand that it's not just protecting the U.S. government and a bunch of government officials. It's clearly got to be protecting civil society. We don't do that at all.
Right, and I think to that point, yeah, I think the average American can understand something as basic as somebody like Bernie Madoff making off with a ton of somebody's money. I think what's a little bit more difficult for people to wrap their arms around is what are we doing to ensure that we don't end up with, the secrets of the health of our military men and women, right? When you start talking about the threat of a 21st century world, is it perhaps a greater threat to have China in possession of genetic marker information that they've hacked from our U.S. military than perhaps even Iran with a nuclear weapon? Is that perhaps a greater threat? A 21st century world where we have people with the genetic data required to start replicating some of these viruses that we're in the throes of dealing with right now.
Yeah, and that I think is the really critical thing. The average American understand that you go look at your bank account online, all of a sudden it's disappeared. What if that's a hacker? Or you get a ransomware demand when you turn on your computer and it says your computer is frozen unless you send $20,000 to the following address. We can get our hands around that. What we can't really wrap our hands around is, okay, so this is some government hack. We're not really sure what they did, but it somehow doesn't affect me in my day-to-day life. I think that the difference is in a cyber war, this is not somebody dropping a bomb. This is not somebody taking land. This is not people on a battlefield. This is out in cyberspace. And all the more reason we need some rules. We need the red lines. We need to protect our civilian society. And we need to admit that we need some help because we're lousy at doing it. How many more hacks like this do we need or data theft or intellectual property theft before we say, okay, let's get really serious about this.
Absolutely. Well, KT McFarland, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. If I don't talk to you, have a wonderful Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Joe.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV because we're real news for real people.